Okay, let's dive into this story about a mortgage fraud allegation against a U.S. senator that took a completely wild and really fascinating turn. So, picture this. A realtor sends in a tip about a powerful senator, and it spirals into this big federal investigation. But then, in a crazy twist, the tables turn, and suddenly the investigators themselves are the ones under the microscope. This is one of those stories where the lines between politics, regulation, and justice get really, really blurry. All right, so let's start at the beginning. Section 1, a realtor's accusation. How did this whole thing even get started? Well, it all began with one person and a stack of documents that seemed to point to something major. So here's the heart of it. The big accusation is that Senator Adam Schiff, who represents California, might have misrepresented the status of his Maryland home on loan applications. He apparently called it his primary residence to get mortgages. And that, right there, is the potential fraud at the center of this whole affair. And the person who kicked all this off is Christine Bish. Now, she's a California realtor, but she also has this really interesting background as a skip tracer. Someone who's an expert at tracking down people and information. That gives her a pretty unique talent for digging through public records. The person on the other side of this accusation is, of course, Adam Schiff, a very prominent Democrat from California. At the time he took out these mortgages, he was a member of the House, so he was splitting his time between Washington, D.C. and his district back home. And then there's our third key player, Bill Pulte. He's the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, that's the FHFA. They're the ones who regulate giants like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. His involvement is really what turned a realtor's tip into a full-blown federal case. And things moved fast. I mean, really fast. Bish sends her research to Pulte's agency in April. By the end of May, his agency had already sent a formal criminal referral over to the Department of Justice. And by July, bam, the story was in the headlines. Now on to Section 2, a grand jury surprise. So you think Bish is getting ready for her big moment, right? She's the key witness against a powerful senator. But when she showed up to testify, the case took a turn that absolutely no one saw coming. Yeah, just a few days before she was scheduled to testify in November, Bish was feeling pretty confident. She even posted on social media that she was the one who started it all. She's the key witness, and that this whole thing was just getting started. She clearly thought her information was about to be the centerpiece of the case. And this is where the story just flips on its head. Instead of walking into a grand jury room to talk about Senator Schiff's mortgages, Bish gets pulled into a conference room. And the prosecutor's questions? They weren't about the mortgages at all. They were about her contacts with Director Pulte and the other officials who sent the referral. So you gotta ask, why the sudden shift? Well, according to the New York Times, the Justice Department was getting nervous. They were worried that the original investigation was looking a little weak and maybe even politically motivated. And if there was any improper sharing of information behind the scenes, well, that could just poison the entire case. Which brings us to Section 3. The investigators investigated. I mean, this is a complete reversal. The spotlight swings completely away from the senator and shines directly onto the federal officials who launched the probe in the first place. And the fallout was huge. It was like a cascade of dominoes. Key people in Fannie Mae's Ethics and Internal Investigations Unit were fired. Top executives, including the CEO, were forced out. And even the acting inspector general at the FHFA was asked to resign after he was the one who sent Fannie Mae's own internal probe over to the DOJ. So, what was going on? This whole mess seems to have started with an internal investigation at Fannie Mae. They were looking into whether Director Pulte had maybe misused his authority to get confidential mortgage records, not just for Schiff, but for other Democratic officials too. Okay, so this whole situation leaves us with two very different ways to look at things. One interpretation, which came from a former Attorney General's chief of staff, is that this is all just procedural. The theory is that the DOJ is just cleaning up the chain of custody for the evidence before, as he puts it, dropping a bomb on Adam Schiff. But then you have the other view, the one reported by the New York Times, which is that the original investigation is basically dead in the water, that it's fundamentally flawed. In this version of the story, the DOJ isn't preparing an indictment. It's trying to do damage control on a politically charged probe that might have been handled improperly from the very start. All right, let's pull back a bit in Section 4, Politics, Motives, and Defenses. Because to really get what's going on here, you have to look at the bigger picture. The legal questions, the political motivations, and the people at the very center of it all. So back to that central question about the mortgages. Is it illegal? Well, there's no easy answer. Schiff's spokesperson says the lenders knew his situation perfectly well. Legal experts told CNN that the law is pretty ambiguous. A report from ProPublica pointed out that officials from both parties have done similar things and it's almost never prosecuted. But Christine Bish, she sees it very differently. She argues it's part of a pattern in practice that points to bigger issues with election integrity. And Christine Bish's own journey into this world is a story in itself. Her political activism didn't start with national politics. It began with a local water contamination issue and her own personal health crisis. That frustration is what led her to run for office and to use those skip tracer skills to do what she calls opposition research on residency issues. And her political profile has grown a lot. I mean, check this out. After getting just 8% in a 2022 primary, she won the nomination in 2024 and pulled in 42% of the vote in the general election. That's a pretty big deal. All right, let's move to our final section, an unfinished story. So where does all of this leave us right now? Well, as of today, NBC News is reporting that prosecutors just haven't found enough evidence to charge Senator Schiff with any crime. Meanwhile, the investigation is still going, but the focus remains squarely on the conduct of those federal officials who first brought the case to the DOJ. So what's the big takeaway from all this? I think it's that a simple tip from one citizen managed to peel back the curtain on these deep conflicts happening inside federal agencies. It really forces you to ask some tough questions about where the line is between a legitimate investigation and a politically motivated one. And that's the central question we're left with, isn't it? Was this a legitimate investigation that got derailed by some mistakes, or was it a politically motivated effort from the very beginning? And is the current probe a cover-up, or is the system actually policing itself? One thing is for sure, this story is far from over.